My name is Dr. Claire Hughes, and I'm going to be talking to you today about differentiating up for to teach. Differentiating up is a concept that takes on the philosophy that every single child in your classroom can learn, that every single child in your classroom needs to learn on any given day something new and something valuable. Now, with that philosophy, that means that when you have kids like the three I'm going to introduce you to, that you're going to have to do something for them. Special educators are very used to differentiating up. Special educators find the absolute key essential elements of a curriculum. They find multiple ways of representing information. They find multiple ways of presenting information. They find multiple ways that kids can express information. And so they're used to multiple modalities. They're used to multiple expressions. They're used to having a variety of options. And in those options should also be kids who already know the base level content, who don't need to learn the base level content because they already have it. They do need to learn something new. And so with that process, there are kids like Morgan. My third year of teaching, I had a girl named Morgan who was one of those kids. She was identified gifted. She answered everything very quickly. She answered everything thoroughly. And she was finished before I almost could pass out anything else. She would write very quickly. She'd put it down. And she'd be talking to all of her neighbors and say, "Morgan, what are you doing?" And she'd say, "But I'm finished. What else can I do?" And I said, "Oh, well, why don't you help your neighbors?" Until the day that Morgan missed, I think it was problem number 9 on a worksheet, and all the kids around her also got problem number 9 wrong. And I realized that not only in the time span that I allocated for my students to learn, Morgan had finished not only her work, but the work of 2 or 3, and sometimes 4 other students as well. Morgan needed more, and not more problems. She didn't need to know more to do 25 when everybody else did 10. She already knew the content. She needed the next level of content. She really did need more challenge. Not just more, but more challenge. Then there was a kiddo named Roberto was from Mexico, had an ELL student who had really unusual answers, really interesting, out of the box. And for a while, I thought it was cultural differences, that came from a different culture, and what an interesting thing. And he'd look at me with those big, wonderful eyes and say, "But I do not understand." And it wasn't that he didn't understand. He did understand. He just understood it in a different way. And so I started asking him to elaborate, to be more creative. Well, what else could you do? What is another way we could do that, Roberto? And all of a sudden he moved from not understanding to rich depth of understanding. And it was the infusion of creativity. And so that was one of the things I learned about Roberto. And my third kiddo that I had, I'm ashamed to admit I didn't see him or recognize his abilities until about halfway through the school year. He sat in the back. He sat as far away from me as he could. He talked with his friends. He was very chatty. His work was a B or a C, and I'd fuss at him for getting back on target at task and stuff. And he was fine until the day we had an open-ended project where it was science-based, and he wanted to bring in social studies, and he wanted to look at the history of it, and he wanted to see how it connected to math. And I realized that this kid saw connections. This kid got complexity. And so looking at these 3 kids that year, I realized that I really did need to step up my game in terms of what I was offering. And it didn't have to be strenuous, and it didn't have to be challenging. So I went asking for help, and what I found were things like, make it more rigorous, add more relevance. And I thought, that's great. How? What are the tools? I didn't know what that would look like, or how I would look at it and defend it as that's more rigorous. I knew that giving Morgan more of the same work wouldn't work, and that could be considered rigorous, but that wasn't what I was after. So I'm going to present to you today the 3 tools that I found for differentiating up, and 3 things that you can check against to determine, did I really make it more creative and more rigorous and more complex? Those are all great things to do it, but how do you do it? The first tool I found were the actual standards themselves. The standards are scaffolded. They are in a sequence so that they build upon each other. If you look at this grade level right above the grade level you're on, it will have a strand that adds another level of piece. One grade level may be asking for setting. The next grade level may be asking for how did the setting impact the plot? What is the interaction between the setting and the plot? That's still using the base level standard of setting, but you're adding the rigor into it. You're adding more challenge into it. You're making it get a little more harder. The second tool is to use Bloom's. Bloom's level or DOKs, whichever tool is preferred, is to add different kinds of questioning strategies and different kinds of activities and results as the end of it. So if we're asking what is the setting, it's one thing to be able to define the setting. It's a whole nother thing to be able to use a setting or to change the setting. What if you change the setting in a particular story? Using the DOKs adds that level of complexity. It also adds to what the children are going to have to be able to do. And one of the ways to add that complexity also is to say, how might this relate to science? How might this relate to what we're reading? How might this relate to history? Making those interconnections as well is a really strong way of adding that complexity level using Bloom's verbs as that tool. The third trick, and it's not really a trick, third strategy, is to use creativity, is to really start looking at ways to add creativity. And one of the best ways I found with creativity is just to say, that was a great answer. Now elaborate on it. That's a great response. Now really, can you come up with a different way of doing it? Can you come up with an original way? Are there more ways that could happen? And asking for multiple ways of creativity. You can also include more content as well. How could that creativity relate to science? Those kinds of pieces. But that infusion of looking at creative tools and really using creative tools is one of the best applications of creativity to infuse it within the curriculum. Those are the three strategies in terms of the tools to help apply depth, complexity, and creativity into a curriculum so that you can then test it. One of the best ways I then would go is to check back. And if my administrator or somebody walked in and said, well, tell me how you've added rigor, relevance, and relationships to this curriculum, the 3 R's, I would talk about using the base level curriculum, the base level standards. One of the points I want to make is that differentiating up for gifted or highly able kids doesn't have to be something different. It's not something totally outside the box. It's starting with the standards, starting with the curriculum, starting with the basics, and adding on to it, making it more complex, taking it to the next level. If you use the analogy of a ladder, the ladder simply starts from one place and moves the child to another. And that's the philosophy that I'm talking about. The philosophy that every child in that classroom has the right to take the next step. So if you have a learner who's grade levels below, very, very behind, they also have a right to learn the next step, to go to the next level. And in order to do that, you have to back down the curriculum at times. They also have a right to be able to know what the basic skills are before you can start adding on to them. So to make sure that those grade level content, basic standards, basic understandings are there. And creativity is something that all kids can use, particularly for kids with disabilities and particularly with kids who have high abilities, that adding creativity may be the only way in at times into a particular content or an idea that we're trying to teach. I hope these 3 tools are helpful. Thank you very much.